You want to give us an intro?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mapmaking Spotlight Show. I'm here with my co-commentator Skyhawk and our always present community leader Zaandaa. How's everybody doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Oh boy, I'm a community leader now.
Yeah. So
And today we're
today,
going to be talking about cameras.
yeah, we're going to be looking at kind of how to make a nice, decent camera easily and quickly for the upcoming custom map jam. And then we're also going to go a little bit beyond that and look at some of the advanced camera features and how to use them. But hopefully we'll spend more time on just like getting something working quickly to kind of show that cameras don't have to be super complicated. They kind of have this reputation of being one of the hardest pieces of the editor to learn, and they are. But you can make something decent in without too much confusion. So first thing we're going to have to do is make a map. Let's call it Simple Cam. And I maybe should have prepared this ahead of time so that I didn't have to make them on stream. But you know what? Sometimes we just make mistakes.
Just showing how easy it is.
Yeah. Let's have like a platform up here, and then we can have like a wall climb, and lead out to this, and then we can have some combat here, and then we can lead back into the. Let's maybe go like that, and then like this, and then lead back into the wall climb. Nope. There we go, and then we can have a finish up here. So we can put some dust, and then some dust, and
Wowie.
dust. Let's have some combat. What kind of combat do we want? What's your favorite large enemy?
A large enemy?
Yeah.
Well, how large is large? Or like
I'm talking like
large?
3 or 4 hits, 3 or 4 heavies.
Oh man, those are. I don't know if there's a favorite.
All right.
I'm thinking we had a totem and a wolf.
Sounds like a plan. Here, let's put the wolf between the guys. There we go. And then, so if we're doing that, let's replace all of these virtual leaves with these leaves.
This is a pretty detailed level.
Yeah.
I agree with MSG's comment. Still better than half of Atlas.
Alright. So, there we go. We have a map. And it has no camera. Let's get one more thing. There we go. And then let's add it back to it so that people can't escape. A little steeper. There we go.
Capital D :
Looks escapable.
Yeah, probably. That's okay. So,
like you could do a bunch of twirlies.
let's play through this map and see what we see. So first of all, one thing I'm noticing is that I'm seeing a lot of the ground when I'm playing through this. Like when I was walking along, half of the screen is below me. And that's just because of how FreeCam works.
Now, Skyhawk, the other thing I'm noticing is it's really hard to tell what's up ahead with how we've got this right now.
That is true. You don't really get to see, especially in this climb section, you don't get to see much in front of you.
Well, without a camera, the player is just centered.
Exactly, yeah. So here, without a camera, it's always just trying to keep you in the center of the frame. So it'll sometimes lag behind a little bit, like as you're moving forward, it'll sort of just trail behind you a little bit. And the faster you go, the more it'll kind of do that. If I add in a boost here at the start, you can kind of see that a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's due to the camera kind of, easing in between the previous position and the next position for the most part.
So I'll put the mouse in the
not
center
a-
of the frame where I would usually be. Oh,
Yeah.
right there. And then if I do a boost, you can see I'm all the way over there on the right until the camera catches up.
I'd never seen it that way, actually.
Yeah,
I think the camera also has a max speed.
yeah, I think so too. Like it'll try
That's pretty
to
much it anyway.
catch up as fast as it can. So that's kind of the limit of free cam behavior. And for some maps, it does work pretty nice. Like if you don't know where the player is going to go, and like it's just they have so many options, it's hard to make a camera path. Free cam works decently well. Sometimes
yeah, probably
it's,
stuff like prism maps, cruise
Yeah.
control.
Yeah, sometimes no camera is better than a camera that doesn't like show you everything you need to see. And as for what you do need to see, there's kind of like two main things that you want a camera to do. The camera has to, first of all, show you where you are. Being on screen is very important for playing. And also show you where you're trying to go. So being able to kind of like lead you into the next section. And that's where free cam doesn't always work out very well, because by centering on you and not centering on the map, like it can't always point you in the right direction. So like in this corner here, like 3/4 of the screen is taken up by just dirt, and we can do a lot better than that. We can kind of trend the camera up a little more and show the player what's coming up. So let's do that right now. If we switch to, first of all, let's get out of advanced tools so that we have the normal UI. There we go. So if we go to the camera tab, basic camera controls, you click and it places a camera node. And for some reason my camera nodes are set to 970, but default is 1080. So we'll put it back to that.
How the heck did you do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was maybe because I was looking at different camera nodes in the Nexus, and one of them must have been that. Yeah. So yeah, click to place nodes, and then while a node is selected, shift-click other nodes to connect them, and it'll draw this line in between them. One important thing to note, a single node by itself does nothing. You can see I'm still in free cam, even though there's a node nearby. That is because this node is completely functionless until we connect it. So now that there are two nodes, I can see if I get close to this path. Here, let's turn on cameras just so we can see it while we're playing. So when I'm over here, I'm still in free cam, but then once I get close to this path, it kind of picks me up and it puts me on this path. And now it'll stop me when I get to the edges, and it'll only travel along this line. So as a map maker, we can kind of control what our player gets to see. So let's just keep going with this. Let's connect a few more nodes, and then once we get to this corner, let's go like about here. Now we have to kind of change the direction of our path. And so we don't want to just have a straight corner here. We can kind of start easing up the camera a little bit sooner than that. Hey, Maybetta, nice to see you. Thank you for the raid. Alright, so now that we have an upward section, we'll have to kind of... I think I'll just put in some lines here, and then we'll see how it works. We might end up not liking this right away.
Yeah, and honestly, this is kind of one of my favorite ways to make cameras. This is just kind of start it somewhere, get kind of a line going, play through it, figure out what you like, what you don't like, and adjust it after the fact.
Yeah. So the only controls we've talked about are clicking to place and shift-clicking to connect. You can connect even with like just as you're placing. So if you shift-click while placing, it'll connect them immediately. So you don't have to like place two and then connect them, just for convenience. And then also right-click is delete. One problem with this camera path we can see is that we're not connected right away when the level starts. So we kind of get this jump as we start playing the map. So the way we fix that is we go and we click on this first node, and we come over here to the left and we see connect. what this will do is it'll pull players in this circle into the camera path, and so it'll connect you right away.
Are you dragging that circle, by the way?
Yeah, so to change the size of this circle, you can click on the edge, and that'll just change the size. You also have an option up here. You can see node area. You can just set this number, and that'll just, if you want clean numbers, you can do that. And actually, the same thing works for camera size. So we have another screen height here. I set it to 1080 just because that's a nice normal number. You can make it bigger or smaller here, and you can also drag this, which not many people use. But we'll talk more about Zoom later.
That?
Yeah.
Yeah, the next question I was going to ask was, what are those lines on the side of the camera?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we mentioned before how the camera kind of like trails behind the player in free cam. In like an actual camera path, it actually does the opposite. It tries to stay ahead of the player. We can see here that there's this little green dot in the center of my body, and when I move, the green dot goes ahead of me. And that is what the camera path is trying to follow, is this green dot. And it does okay. It's because, like we said before, one of the main purposes of a camera is to show the player what's coming up. And so kind of leading with that green dot helps towards that. And so that's what these edges are for. We noticed that even past the node, there's a little bit of line here. And that's because there's like a soft edge on this camera. It'll try to... So here, when I'm standing here, we can see like a bit of this edge of the wall. If I boost in that direction, if I have a lot of speed, we can see the flat wall starts to appear. So it just gives a little bit of extra room in the camera's path. So I believe this middle line is the normal bounds of the camera. Maybe not. Maybe it... It's hard to say exactly. But I believe these extra bounds are just for that easing. Perhaps. Maybe not. Actually, you know what? Now that I'm looking at this, I think I've been mistaken about that.
Yeah, it seems like that's just the normal bounds.
Yeah, because when we were standing here, when we walk in this direction, we see more of this wall, but that wall isn't within the box. So I guess...
Oh,
yeah.
What MSG just said in the chat.
Yeah, and what One Suit Samus kind of guessed. So yeah, different screen ratios, but I'm surprised. I didn't know Dustforce even handled different screen aspect ratios. It locks into 9:16, so that's kind of surprising. Maybe it's like a relic of different dev just times where they thought they would have different aspect ratios. Well, that's the thing. I am playing windowed right now, and even if I change the window size, this might look weird on stream. But you can see it always fixes itself to the right aspect ratio. It just has black bars around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess that's just carryover from dev versions then.
Well, alright then.
That's kind of bizarre.
That is bizarre. You learn something new every day. So, anyway, let's see how this camera works. So first of all, very first thing is that we kind of kept the camera above the player to show less of the ground. Like, the player doesn't need to see half of their screen is underground because there's no gameplay happening there. Being able to see the sky and the area with these platforms is much more important.
Yeah, and on a lot of levels, there's usually stuff in the background, not stuff in the foreground. So
yeah, it's more interesting to show them that.
You know, the other thing I noticed off the top with this camera, Skyhawk, if you restart, is we can see that first set of dust to the right, just right away when we start the level.
Yeah, good point.
Being able to kind of lead the player by showing them where to go is often a really important part of the level, because if you just look at this without that dust, it's really hard to tell, hey, I need to go right, just right away.
We kind of did, even without the camera, we were able to lead the player just by showing them this dust and showing them this wall. So that's kind of like hinting that, oh, there's nothing to the left and there's something to the right.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Even the player faces right.
Yeah, exactly. If the player were facing left, I'd be so confused.
It would contribute.
Yeah. But the camera does a really good job of reinforcing that. So yeah, already the camera node is starting to the right of the player. So we didn't need it all the way back here because now we see just way too much of the wall. So we can kind of lead them in the direction we want to go and put it over to the right.
Makes that wall way too tempting. Whereas right now it seems like just kind of a side barrier.
Yeah. Here we can see kind of how the smoothing for camera works. So I mentioned before that we don't want something like this that's just a square corner. And so now that we have this fancy dust mod line, we can kind of see why that's the case. If we do have something like that, we get this really weird behavior where the camera tries to ease itself around this bend, and it makes just the line really weird. We get this dip, and it just, the fast movement is kind of jarring. So we end up instead making a kind of smoother corner with a shallower bend, a larger angle, however you want to call it. And we can see that now it's more of a rounded, like square corner.
Yeah.
And we can
And
still
again
see
here
all
we
we
kind
need
of
to.
have, yeah, I was gonna say we kind of still have that same idea where we keep showing them the dust as we go up.
Yeah. So there's a bit of problem with the camera movement around this area. We'll have to fix that.
Yeah, it looks like we'll need to move it to the left a bit more.
And then here it looks like we can see a lot more of the ground than we probably need to, so we can move this camera up even more. So let's adjust those couple things. And let's fix this camera. So, there's a couple ways we could fix it. For now, how do we want to do this? I think what I'll do is I'll just increase the zoom so that you can see a bit more. So, here we'll move this back, and we'll move this whole track further away from the wall because we're about to make it bigger. Let's change this to 1250. And then let's also change this to some number in between, let's say like 1500 or 1150. And so
Yeah, I was gonna say 1500 would
yeah,
not be in between those two,
not
Skyhawk.
1500, my bad. Okay, and then so we'll adjust these so that we kind of see a bit of the ground, kind of the same amount of ground as we saw before. And then we have this large one. We make sure we're not seeing too much of the wall. Let's go maybe like that. And then do the same thing up here. It's 1250. And then we might as well make the whole rest of the map. Actually, no, we can zoom in again at the end.
Yeah, I was gonna say that second to last node should be raised up a bit as well, since we were raising that last one.
Yeah, so nice smooth curve, rounded corners. Is it okay to increase the zoom suddenly? And what is a good way to smoothen the zoom? Yeah, so the way that the game handles different zooms, so if we have 1080 in one node and then some larger number in the next node, here, let's change this. Then it'll interpolate between the two. It'll kind of change the scale gradually. So if I make this node really large, excuse me one sec. So if now we have a 1500 camera next to a 1080, so we see once we pass this node, it'll start zooming out until we reach this node, and now we're at 1500. And so now it'll start zooming in because this node was 1150. So yeah, that's how you can kind of not have to worry about zoom. You do still have to worry about it a little bit to make sure it's not too jarring. Like if we make this really huge, then there's just not enough space between these two nodes for it to interpolate very smoothly. You know what? Even that's not too bad. That's not as jarring as I thought it would be.
It would be jarring though if you were going at, say, a boost speed.
True. Yeah, so if I were going faster. That's another thing, is having a lot of speed does make cameras harder. Just because keeping up with the player is tricky. Yeah, linear interpolation, I believe, is the term. But yeah, so that worked out surprisingly well. So you don't have to worry too much about changing zoom looking weird.
If you are concerned and you want to kind of smooth it more, you can do what we were trying to do here, which is have some intermediary nodes where you're kind of making it smooth slower.
I was afraid that these two nodes were too close together, so instead of just going straight from 1080 to 1250, I kind of made this node a little bit higher, so that instead we're smoothing over this entire distance. So let's take a look at this new camera and let's see what we think, now that we've added in some zoom. This corner is still pretty good. It's not bending down like that bad example we saw. And now we can much more clearly see this left platform. And when we come over to this platform, oh wow, I'm surprised that it goes down this far. That might be something we still need to fix.
Yo, we broke the camera.
Yeah. So it seems like the corner, or the camera thinks that when we're going this far left, we wanted to go back. We're trying to backtrack. So we'll have to deal with that in some other way, but in a normal run, we probably won't go that far left. What I wanted to say though was the difference between this and FreeCam. In FreeCam, the camera would have been centered on the platform over here, and it would have been like maybe less clear that what we're doing overall is just trending straight up. But now that the camera is locked along the straight vertical line, even when we go to the left, since the camera doesn't follow us, we kind of know that, oh, I'm not supposed to continue going this way, I'm supposed to continue going up. And then we come up to the top. And then we get our ending combat. And there we go, that's the end of the level. And I think, honestly, just this is a pretty good camera. We could probably stop here and just call it a good map. We did have that.
This is pretty much what I'd look for in like a CMJ camera if I was just trying to make something quick. Like, shows you everything you need to. It's relatively smooth.
Yeah, we did have that one kind of hiccup in the platform over here, which we'll fix with a little bit more fancy stuff. But we don't really need to fix that because the player probably won't encounter that on a normal route.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that, especially if I was trying to make something quick. If I was putting in more effort, as you said, we've got some tools later that can deal with that. But for a starting point, I think this is a very nice camera.
I think for gameplay purposes, not camera purposes, I want to add more dust so that you can just super that ending. Not that it's really super relevant, but I don't want to make that too much.
No, we're getting to the Atlas 2012 levels of dust.
Yeah, well, I mean, they gotta have super, and it's a short level.
Are you planning to release this?
Yeah, I think so.
Alright, well, we got a couple chat questions.
Yeah, let's hear the chat questions before we move on.
The zoomed out camera make the gameplay different, maybe more difficult in precise areas?
There's
probably a limit to how zoomed out is ideal.
Yeah, so
at the very least.
For zoom, I think typically 1080 is kind of the normal amount, and like that's what almost every map uses, and so it's a nice normal amount of size for seeing your character as well as seeing your surroundings. Zooming out more definitely lets you see more of your surroundings, but maybe less of your character. I think the limit for that end is about 2000. If a camera is more zoomed out than 2000, I think you start to not be able to see your character too well.
Yeah, and so technically unloading is the important thing when it comes to camera being too zoomed out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you
I
can
imagine
go too far away.
some enemies are gonna pop in, at the very least.
Mhm.
So, at some camera size, you the camera won't show enemies that would be on screen, but technically, would fit within that boundary.
Yeah, so let's
They're
place
just not
some.
loaded yet.
Let's place some prisms out here.
If you want a
Yeah, Skyhawk will
reference
demo it.
for a very large camera, I recommend checking out Physics Fun by Abu.
Oh yeah,
The
that's a good
end of that
reference.
level has some very large cameras for some very interesting gameplay that not really any other map has explored.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to the limit here. There we go. So we can see over on the left that there's only one prism here, but if we look, there's supposed to be like several, and so there's a prism right here that's just not appearing, even though it's on screen, because it's just too far away from the camera. And if I walk over there, I just disappear completely, because the player unloads as well. So yeah,
The POG unload percent route.
yeah, this is true unload, where you don't even have to leave the screen.
Yeah, so that's clearly too big.
Yeah. Which, yeah, that's a little bit far out. But I think a reasonable, like, the limiting factor before that is just being able to see yourself and see what you're doing. So when you're that far out, it's kind of hard to, like, pay attention to where you are relative to stuff and maybe how your attacks are being placed.
Yeah,
I think
there's no real
2000
reason
is kind of an
for
upper limit.
yeah, there's no real reason for a boost map where you could be going as fast as possible reasonably. Where like 2000 isn't enough to see far ahead of you.
Yeah.
And in those kinds of boost levels, you're not gonna need those little kinds of tight squeezes. You're not gonna do boost level and then surprise Terra,
Yeah.
and like really tiny enemies or something. And if
Yeah.
you did, it'd be kind of unpleasant. But you technically could.
Yeah, I think a boost map is kind of what I want to show off after this one, just because, yeah, they're good for showing some of the more fancy camera stuff. Because, yeah, you need to do a little bit more work to keep the camera ahead of the player when they're going that fast.
Yeah, there's some good basic stuff so far.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to show for large camera is that Abyss is notoriously one of the most zoomed out cameras in vanilla, and it is only 1650. So upper bound is, yeah, not super big.
Oh, that's 1651.
Yeah. Oops.
I hadn't even thought about the fact that this is a relatively large camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't really need super large cameras.
And yeah, so by being zoomed out, this map can kind of just be a single line. It doesn't have to do very much moving left and right. It does have a little bit of that here with some fancy camera stuff we'll show off in a bit. But
yeah, Abyss does need a very zoomed out camera, not just because of like how wide it is or anything like that. It's really hard in vertical levels, especially a falling level, to show what's coming up in advance, because you're working with less of the screen. So in climbing levels, it's particularly challenging, but it's even more so in falling levels because you're going down so much faster.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to be able to see as much below you as you can because the stream isn't really shaped in that direction.
Yeah, and even in Abyss, you can't really see that far ahead of you if you fall and make a mistake. It's hard to react.
Let's see, other chat questions that we missed. Can you make a camera follow an entity? Non-player. No, unfortunately the camera always follows the player. There's not really any... maybe a script stuff could handle that, but I think it would be quite a bit of work. I don't think there's an easy way to trick it like that.
I think you could make it work in a script.
Camera,
You could maybe have the player be some kind of invisible entity, and you move them around to make it seem like it's following. Like you make the player follow the entity that you want the camera to follow. I don't know, but
I'll double check
it
the
could be
API
possible.
real quick.
I'm just thinking you could get the basically API, or you could get the enemy position and maybe set the camera based on that.
Maybe,
But yeah, I think it would be a
yeah, I
decent
think
bit
you
of
could
work.
just set the camera position itself, huh? You could do like
Okay, so the camera has a puppet
Yeah.
entity that it's following.
Right.
So you can specify that
Yeah.
in the script, but I don't know the effects of
I
doing
think
anything
that would
with
change
that.
what the player is. I think like behind the scenes, you are controlling the camera itself, and the camera controls the player. I'm not 100%
You're
sure.
controlling
on that,
the Dustman controllable.
I don't think you are. I don't think that's true. I think the camera is the one controlling the Dustman control. Anyway, yeah, I don't know for sure. So
we won't worry about the details for that right now, but we could test it out at a future time.
We could. Anyway, here, this was one of the large camera examples that Avenge was talking about, and we can see that it's still around 2000. It's a little bit higher.
It's even larger at the end. The end is what I was thinking about.
Oh, right, this section. Yeah, this one gets pretty crazy. I forgot about that.
This map is fantastic, and if you haven't played it, you should.
Alright, here we go.
General comment to everybody in chat.
Oh.
But yeah, this one we get into some of those bigger cameras that we were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this map kind of deals with it by the fact that it really doesn't have any entities to be concerned with.
Yeah, we mentioned how higher speeds you kind of need to be a little bit more careful with your camera. This one is very high speed, so it has to be very careful with its camera. Yeah, okay.
And then we get to this this section, which is one of the only times I've ever seen somebody on Atlas do something like this.
It is quite the unique map.
I remember staying up till like 4 a.m. to watch Timmy play this map back in the day.
Oops.
But yeah, Maybetta, play through this map on stream. This map is fantastic.
There's some kind of funny camera work going on here to make it all just work in such a large area.
What are the camera sizes on those?
Yeah, here, let's take a look. Almost 4,000. So that unloading limit that we were looking at earlier, we're getting pretty close to it.
Yeah, that would only matter for enemies that are off screen.
Yeah. Yeah, and that area, to get around it, just uses no enemies.
Or if the player traveled so fast that it unloaded.
Yeah.
Which is possible.
Back to the realm of possibility, though. When we're not using crazy dust mod gimmicks, we typically won't get that much speed.
Yeah.
Another question for Yatiers. How big can a camera be for a single screen map?
Single screen is a good question. I think we can probably talk about that now. I don't think we need any other fancy tricks. So for a single screen camera, as we mentioned before, just a single node won't do anything, unfortunately. So if we do this, this is still just free cam. So what you have to do is you have to take two nodes and place them very close together, and that'll make a tiny path that doesn't really move. And so that's how you make it look like it's just one fixed spot. If we make this into a connect node, we've got this very large size here. And yeah, so we can
you
see
can even put them on top of each other, Skyhawk, once you're finished. And
the thing I'm worried about putting them on top of each other is that we might get a different weird direction for the camera. So by putting them just slightly off, here, let me make them not this crazy zoomed out.
With them at least offset, you know which direction it's going to go.
Yeah, exactly. I know which way it'll kind of trend to when I go off the sides. So if I go... Actually, maybe... Yeah, so here... you know what? I'm curious. Maybe I'm wrong about this. We'll see.
The only reason I mention it is because that's the way I've always done single screens, is with them basically on top of each other.
So here... you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. It seems like it's still, like, easing left and right. Yeah, so maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I can just put them on top of each other.
So what I've seen in the past is there's a fixed camera script that people have used for some single screen maps.
There is, but if we're
that's a
talking about
separate
like
thing,
just
though.
simple map, then you don't need fancy scripts. This works pretty well. You do get this kind of like shifting left and right, but for the most part, that's not going to be a huge issue. But if you do care about that, there are ways to fix it with DustMod.
Yeah, this is a really quick and easy one.
Oh, not 200, 2000. Here we go. So I think 2000 still kind of applies for a nice upper bound for camera size, even with single screen. And then we can kind of use the border of this to kind of tell where to place the box. So if we come back to camera, there we go, and then like this. And then I think is this outer line the one? There we go. And then we'll have to move that a little bit. There we go. Is that? Yeah, that looks pretty good. I can maybe move in these a little bit more. Oops.
Oh man, you can fit a lot in a camera that size.
There's a lot of space for activities here. I don't think there's many single screen maps that are this large.
How large is this?
This is 2000, and MSG just made a suggestion of how we could demonstrate a jarring change in zoom. Yeah, so that is pretty jarring. But even then, the smoothing, it had like a maximum zoom speed, so it's not as bad as I would have thought. But it's still, yeah, it's not good.
If you want to see kind of a larger map in terms of gameplay, not necessarily camera size for single screen, Total Darkness by Quantum Coral looks pretty big, but it's only a 1450.
But yeah, so that's kind of how a single screen camera can work, is just two nodes very close together, and just make sure that you change both of their zoom level to the same thing so that you don't get that jarring change in zoom that we were just looking at. And very important to have the connect radius cover the starting position. If we were to have, for example, the start position in the top left, how would we deal with that? And I think we could just make the connect node super huge. I think that would work. Let's try that. So now the connect node covers the entire map basically, and yeah, it pulls us into the center. So that's no problem. Let's see, was there any other simple camera thing I wanted to talk about? I guess I can show off some more examples.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't we go into some of the examples we had prepared?
Yeah.
Well, they're the camera types, like whatever attach, interest, and force are.
That's the thing though. Like I don't think for a simple camera, I don't think you need them. You don't need, like, interest nodes are very useful, and we're going to talk about them next, but I don't think they're required. Force nodes are even less required, and detach nodes, they're for kind of combining camera paths with FreeCam in interesting ways, and we'll mention that too, but I don't think that it's
just
super
wondering
important.
if you were going to get into that now or later.
Later, for
sure. We'll get into it in a little bit.
Yeah.
We're kind of hearing things in this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's look
Skyhawk,
at...
what are some simple camera examples?
Here, we're going to look at a bunch of Avenged maps. So this is the infamous attacky. And here, I think we're mostly just using normal nodes.
Yeah, I think this is actually just entirely normal nodes, because I was trying to make this map very quick for the practice week. So this is kind of what I generally do when I'm making more so ramen or quick maps, is I just make basically camera paths for the connect node and a bunch of normal nodes, and usually it ends up working out for about what I want it to do. So this is something I'm pretty experienced at making a camera with.
So yeah, let's take a look at this camera. So we can see we've got some kind of rounded corners. We can see it doesn't follow the path of the map too closely. I see some maps where they make sure that they're following every single turn that the player would make, and I think that's overly complicated. Like, that'll lead to more jagged kind of camera paths, and so letting the camera, like kind of trusting the camera to do some of this smoothing for you around the turns works pretty well.
Yeah, and as I said, this was kind of a quick camera I made, so it may not be perfect in some of the areas talked about here, but
it works well.
It comes down to a lot of playtesting when you're going through it, just making sure everything at the very least works out for what you want it to be.
And I noticed that another thing that lends itself to this camera is that this map doesn't force you to go super fast. Like, you can get some boosts, and let's watch a world record replay. You can get some boosts, but overall there's not too much speed to let the player kind of get ahead of the camera. Yeah, we'll see if it loads. Here we go. Yeah, so you can always see like 1 or 2 enemies ahead of where you are. So you're always able to kind of plan out your next attack.
And as I was talking about earlier, that to me is one of the most important parts of the camera, is just making sure, unless for intent of map you don't want to, that you're showing the player kind of where to go. Leading them with the dust, making sure that they always have a direction.
Yeah, another good thing that MSG mentions is sharp angles are more likely to get the camera stuck as well. Because when you change direction, yeah, the kind of smoothing that it does around the corner might just make a shape that it has trouble getting around.
For me, Jake, I don't. But that's usually because when I'm going to test the camera, I'm basically only testing the camera. So a lot of times when I'm building my gameplay, I do something like what Dello does, where I test my gameplay as I'm making it, and kind of just doing it section by section. And then usually add the camera in after the fact, and kind of make sure the camera lines up with everything.
Yeah. The kind of process that I like to go through, which I don't know if it's necessarily the best. There are definitely some drawbacks, but anyway. Gameplay first. So design your level, and don't worry about camera too much. And then design your camera to show the player to what they need to see. So you can kind of lead the player through the gameplay section. So you've got everything placed out, you just have to lead the player through it. And then once you have your camera made, decorating after that. So here we can see we've got these camera boxes, and this is actually a good way to see what your player will see. So you don't have to worry about decorating down here, because the player's never going to see this. You can see exactly what the player sees by these camera bounds. So yeah, by designing gameplay first, you know what's there, so you can design your camera and show them the next thing. And then you can design your decorations because you know where to spend your effort, what they'll be able to see.
Yeah, and furthermore to that, it's one of those things, when you're playing your own map, you're going to know kind of exactly where everything is, so it can be really difficult to, at points, remember that a camera is needed.
Yeah, for sure. But, and I think that is one of the problems with the all gameplay before camera method, is that you already know where everything is, so maybe when you're designing the camera, you're like, oh, this is good, when actually you can't see as much as you would like. And that's why playtesting is important. Just getting that second opinion.
I was going to say, I can speak from experience and tell you that in almost every circumstance, no matter how good your camera is, it can always be a little bit better.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever made a perfect camera in a map.
Yeah, I think that's why camera has this reputation of just being the hardest part of the editor, is because it has such a high ceiling for how polished it can get, how well it can lead the player through the map, and so.
Now, that said, I've made plenty of fairly good cameras.
Yeah, here, I'll take a look at one more thing we had in mind. Just another Avenged map. It's the CMJ map. From
Yeah, this is my map
CMJ.
from the last CMJ.
Here, if I can find it. Where is
The...
it? There it is, Lava Run. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is quite literally a CMJ map.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one I wanted to make sure, basically, as I was saying before, show them all the dust, make sure they know what's at the bottom of these pits, make sure basically everything's well known.
Yeah.
Apple secret stuff, kinda...
Yeah,
we'll talk more about that later.
We can see a little bit here, though, of just like a simple camera path. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a straight line. You can have intersections. And so if you click a node that already has 2 connections, you can branch off of it and make just a 3rd connection. And so these, there is a little bit of more complexity to these because Dustforce sometimes has trouble figuring out which branch you're trying to follow. And so you kind of need to help it along a little bit more, but just the basic idea of connecting multiple nodes, it works okay.
Yeah, but this, I believe, is almost entirely all just normal nodes and a little bit of camera zoom.
Let's see. One more thing I wanted to talk about with camera zoom. We mentioned that kind of like a nice upper limit is 2000. And then we didn't really talk about a lower limit. I think a nice lower limit is around 800, because the problem with zooming in is that now you're not seeing as much of your surroundings. So if we, look at how tiny that is in comparison. Here we go. Let's have a bit of a map going. There we go. So yeah, here we can at least see like the edge of our attacks and maybe like an enemy that might be in range to kind of aggro on us. Maybe not even. The wolf range might be even further than that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's on screen when it aggroes us.
Oh no. Skyhawk, don't give people bad ideas.
Yeah, but just barely. So yeah, going smaller than this is usually a bad idea, because you can't see things that are currently happening, which is worse than just normal free cam does.
Yeah, there are plenty of good examples of terrible small cameras on Atlas. I don't know any off the top of my head, but I know they exist.
Yeah. Small cameras can be good for giving like a sense of kind of claustrophobia. So like maybe this is kind of a cave area, and we're sort of like, we go from maybe a bigger outer section, and then we have like, so we were out here, and then we come into a cave, and it zooms in and really shows us like this small area, and we don't have much space. And so it can be a nice atmospheric thing, but paying attention to gameplay is very important still.
Yeah, Jake, the Verador map.
Yeah, there are some wacky cameras out there. Alright. Are there any other questions? I think we're going to talk about interest nodes next. But I do want to have like kind of a hard checkpoint here saying like, you can stop here. You can say, okay, I know about normal nodes, I know about camera zoom, and you can make a really good camera with just that.
So the only thing that I can think of for just normal nodes is those red nodes that stick out of them that you can use the scroll wheel for.
Yeah.
Were you gonna cover that too later?
We are gonna cover that too later. They are pretty handy, but I think they're complex enough that I don't want to include them in this simple camera section. So as we move into this more improving the camera, making it kind of adapt to what the player wants to do, we'll start talking about those as well. And yeah, how to do a good camera for a drop is one of the things that we're going to talk about in this section. So I think let's move on. Let's go Intermediate camera.
Yeah, so these
Here,
simple cameras are good for kind of just generally most maps, but once you get into kind of more of the climbing, more of the falling maps, they tend to be a little bit more difficult to pass. Especially if you're going to be going with any large amount of speed through any of that type of stuff.
yeah. So if we talk about boost maps and we talk about falling maps, then that's where we kind of need to do a bit more work with our camera to make sure that people can always see what they're getting into. So here I'm going to design a map with a few boosts, and then let's see, maybe some enemies.
For the sake of good design, you should try it out before you go too far. To make sure it feels good before you have to move too much stuff.
I figure I won't worry too much about it, but alright. There we go, and then let's have just a long boost to the end. Great. Everybody loves that. So let's try it out with FreeCam, and let's see. Because I know where everything is, this isn't too bad. But
yeah, but even with knowing where everything is, it looked like you were struggling a little bit there.
Yeah, struggling a little bit, because yeah, this boost here is entirely off screen. And this slope here is mostly off screen. Yeah, so this is a completely blind drop. There's no lead in at all. So we're going to use camera to fix that. First of all, let's start with our simple camera path. Here we're going to show this first boost right off the bat. We'll have a connect node, and then we'll just kind of lead it right. And so already this is way better because we can see this first boost entirely. We still have room to jump up and still be on screen, which is good because that's probably what people are going to do to get speed. Now let's... Oh, and it just happened that this started at 1200, which I kind of like. So, just a happy accident. It's like a Bob Ross show. Alright, and then we'll just bring this all the way over to here. And so let's see, let's look at zoom first, I guess. Here, already we're kind of seeing a little bit more of this slope as we come down just because of the way it trends down, but we could do more of that, probably just with zoom. So let's change this to be bigger. But then also, when we get to these prisms, we need to attack, so maybe we will bring it back in a little bit. So zoom out a little bit for the drop, zoom in a little bit for the combat, and then we can probably keep it at 1300 for the rest of the map. And then just adjust this so that we're not seeing too much of the area below our map, because we don't want the player to think that there's stuff down there. And we'll put some death zones so that they can't just void out.
But the unload percent.
That's okay. I'll leave a little spot so that people can still unload.
Perfect.
You don't want to have the death zones too close to your gameplay. And actually, you can use the camera to kind of place your death zones as well, because you probably don't want them dying while they're still on screen. Like, this is probably too close. So let's actually bring this down a little bit. Let's go like here. So is that off screen? It is off screen. Good.
Yeah, another great camera tip is make sure that your player isn't dying to a death zone on screen.
Yeah. It's typically not fun to just... Because the whole point of death zones is like, you went out of bounds. And so if you're still on screen at that time, then it's kind of unfair to the player.
Yeah, that's one of the most... That can be one of the most frustrating things you'll ever see in a map, is a death zone where you're just like, why does this death zone exist? And why is it so high up?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. They should be a courtesy to the player, and not a hindrance. Alright.
I completely agree.
So yeah, we can already start to see this slope below us a little bit better with the zoom.
Yeah, but I think we could probably make it better, couldn't we?
We could make it better. Alright, so let's go about making it better. We're going to look at interest nodes. So, first thing that it shows you is now there's these weird circle handles. And these are interest handles. We can control them either with clicking and dragging, or if the nodes are maybe in a weird spot and it's hard to grab them, you can also control them with Alt plus... Oh, whoops, no, Alt, not Alt, Control. Control and scroll wheel moves them, but it moves them together, so sometimes you have to deal with them separately a little bit. One thing I'll like to do, like if I want this one to be really far out and this one to be non-existent, I'll move it further than I want, and then I'll just scroll it down. And there we go. So now this one is directly on it. Now I can control this one freely. But actually, I think I want to do this in the opposite direction, so let's do that.
So I was going to say it.
Yeah. The interest handles, what they do is they pull the camera in towards a node. So we can see we had, let's mark it with a book. There we go, right there. So as our little camera dot gets close to this book and passes this interest handle, we can see that the node gets pulled directly onto this point. And so no matter where we move within here, it'll do its kind of easing thing, but it'll stay just locked onto that node. And so this is a really good way of controlling the camera when the player is moving fast, because if we don't have this, the camera kind of lags behind us. And we want to keep the camera in front of the player so they can keep seeing what's ahead of them. So we change this back to interest, and now this just gives it a little bit more force to pull the camera forward as we're boosting. And we want to do that in a few other places as well. Like this one, we had this huge drop. We want to be able to see the bottom of the drop from the top of the drop. So we take this interest handle and we can move it really far out. And then we do our thing where we pull it back a little bit. And so now, oh, I need enough speed to get to the ceiling. Here we go. So now it pulls us down. It's a little bit softer than I had imagined it would be, but even when we're already on, like we're just on this ceiling, it's already pulling us down to this slope. And actually, I noticed that you can't see the floor of this slope from this node, so let's actually pull it down a little bit more. Maybe give it a bit more zoom. That way you can see not just the slope, but the end of the slope. Like, where's it leading to? There we go. Now we can see kind of the flat bottom of it. And then this part, sure, let's keep going with this interest behavior. So pull the camera forward and pull this one. You know what? By this point, I'm not sure if we need to keep pulling the camera forward. But at the end, we definitely want to pull the camera forward, because the other purpose of an interest node, based on the name, is to have points of interest. So here, we want to show the player these prisms as soon as we can. We want to give them as much time to react to them as we can. So to do that, as soon as they pass this point, we'll already try to show them just this screen. I guess we could maybe do the same for these prisms, huh? Instead of having just the camera goes here, let's maybe focus on these prisms a little bit more. I've been using exclusively the leading in interest node, but you can also have it a trailing one. But there's a problem with these, which I'll show off here. So we're doing our thing, we're showing the player the map, and so this actually isn't too bad. We we get to focus on these prisms for a little bit longer, which is nice. But let's actually make it a little bit worse. Let's show. Actually, you know what? Here, let me show it here. It's easier to show it here because we've got a lot more speed at this point. And then, yeah. So, there we go. So we're starting to see a problem here where we had an interest node leading into this boost so that we could see it as we fell. But now, with this trailing node, it's staying here even though we've already passed this obstacle. So we're on the right side. We want to see this. We can kind of see this prism, but we don't know what's happening next. Like, we've got a lot of speed from this boost. We need to know what's happening next, and the camera is just kind of stuck behind. And so typically these kind of trailing interest handles get used less than the leading ones, because you want to show the player what's coming up, not what they just did. But for this one, I think it's kind of nice to focus on these prisms a little bit past this point. So I'm going to have this trailing one just a little bit out here, because there's not really too many obstacles in this area that they need to worry about, and they've probably lost a bunch of their speed by this point. Let's give them some dust just to make it easier. Actually, yeah, let's put dust in a few other places. There we go. So now let's take a look at this with our newfound interest nodes. Very good. That's how that's meant to be played. And then we can see it pulls us towards this, and it keeps us in this fixed area. And so that kind of tells the player that it's like a point of interest, and because it's a point of interest, it's probably the end of the map. And there's a few other things we're using to signal that, like this triangle prism configuration is very common in Dustforce for signifying the end of a map. Yeah, so just like minor signaling, things like that, you can do with the camera as well as other things. And then they all work together to tell the player what to expect. Yeah. I'm trying to think what other interest node stuff can we do? Oh, of course, more blind drops. I think so we sort of talked about blind drops with this boost into the slope here. Like, we couldn't see this slope below us before, and now we can. Another thing that's a good idea with blind drops, and I'm going to come over here for this, is generally making the drop safe is also a good idea to handle blind drops. So even with a camera, you sometimes always can't give them enough time to react. So let's say we have something like this. And we've got a spike pit. And we want them to land on that platform. Yeah, sure. What camera zoom am I at? Probably 1200. So if we just have the player here, they can't see a platform at all, and then they get a split second where the platform's on screen. Let's see, how many frames exactly is this platform on screen for? And it comes on screen here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. About a third of a second before you die. So it's definitely reactable, but not conveniently. So what we can do is we can use a camera here.
Well, what's worth noting is the average human reaction time, which I think is about a quarter of a second, depending on circumstances, the situation. But I'm gonna look it up real quick.
Like 0.2, or I think I've heard like 0.15 maybe.
Yeah, that's for very specific things, like if you are trying to interpret like on versus off. But if you're trying to also interpret, like, you know, what's being shown, like are you gonna recognize the spikes, or are you gonna see that it's normal, safe to
Yeah.
land ground? So understanding those finer details adds to the reaction time. But a good rule of thumb is going to be around, quarter second, because faster than that is, in my opinion, pretty unreasonable for people to also interpret what they see.
Yeah. Dello says just have bigger eyes. And yeah, I think that actually is a good suggestion. So let's have bigger eyes. Let's make this camera about a 1600. So using that tip of making the camera zoom out when we need to see more below us. And then also let's have our interest node here, and let's have it happen way high up. We can actually, so here we've got the interest node handle going past the edge of the screen, and normally this would be a really bad idea. Like if I have it way high up, it'll probably try to pull us. Here, let's have a platform here. There we go. It'll try to pull us in when we would be off screen, and it kind of glitches out like this, and it's very jarring. But in this situation, there's no ground here for us to stand on in this interest node area. So we won't have that problem, because we'll definitely fall. Like, we know the player will fall into screen. So having the handle go off screen isn't a problem here. And so now, if we do the same test, how much time do we have?
Here we should have, like, easily more than a second of it on screen, I would
I
imagine.
don't know about a second, but maybe half a second. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Huh. That didn't actually help very much. Let's get even bigger then. I think what happened was our interest node didn't pull us in because we weren't in the handle area. So let's do that. Let's make it, and let's maybe make this even lower just so it, there we go. So, let's wait until we see it on screen. Here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. A little bit better. Yeah, it's okay. We didn't get too much extra time. So with blind drops, you still, even with this interest node camera trick, it can be hard to make it so that the player has enough time to see. So what do we do now? There's a few other options. We can still do some extra stuff with camera, but the simplest thing is to not put yourself in this situation in the first place. If your map doesn't necessarily require it, sometimes it's nicer to just give them a bigger platform, not have the blind drop be something fatal.
As MSG said, you can also keep going with bigger cameras and
yeah, have the camera zoom out even further, but then we're starting to push against that limit of 2000 as kind of like an outer scope of the camera. Yeah, have it zoom out earlier even. We could do that, yeah, so we could have here we go, so yeah, so it does pull us down, but we're falling about as fast as the interest node can pull us. Yeah, so another possible thing is a force node, for sure. So what we can do is, instead of having this camera connect, do I want to talk about this right now? Sure, I might as well. So we can have this camera node pull us down, and then once the camera kind of gets into the right area, we can have a separate path. And so what force nodes do is they are like connect nodes, but they work when you're already on a path. If we kind of come over here, if we have a connect node, and we have a path, and then here we have a second connect node, here we go, connect path. let's make this one really big. So here we go. So now we have a small zoomed in camera path. Oh wait, no, that's 1600. How did that happen? All right, well then let's make this one small again. Okay, so now the secondary camera path is the small one, and the main camera path is the big one. So here we're on this camera path. We get into this connect node, but it doesn't activate because we're already on a path. Whereas if we were to somehow spawn in this area without one, now we're on this path. And now this connect node won't do anything until we're able to break free from the path, and now it connects us. So the difference is that a force node works as a connect node even if you're already on a path. So if we are standing here and we walk into this, now it forces us onto this path. So we can use that same kind of idea here. We've still got our drop with our interest node, but now instead of just having the interest pull us, we'll have the force node pull us. And so maybe once we're like halfway down, we will make sure that the force node can pull us down even faster. Because yeah, force nodes are maybe more aggressive than interest nodes are. So you can see it jumps. This, in certain situations, this can be nice, but the problem with this is that it's very not smooth. It's very quick, but the movement in camera can also be like almost as surprising as just seeing the platform appear a fraction of a second before your death. It's like, oh my god, the camera just completely changed. Where am I? Yeah, because showing what is coming up is important, but then also like making sure the player knows where they are. So I think if you can, avoid this situation where you need this camera in the first place. Like oh my god, they need to land on this tiny platform from this blind drop. Flashbang fog trigger. Yeah, avoid that too. But yeah, generally it's nice to just like give people a safe point to land after a blind drop. Don't combine blind drops, like not being able to see what's ahead of you, with fatal punishment. You can maybe punish them by like, oh, maybe there's some dust blocks here, and so you want to fall on these to clear them quickly. And so if you miss them, oh, now you have to spend time clearing them manually. And so it's kind of like a softer punishment. It doesn't kill them. But yeah, you can use force nodes in this way. Whoops. Here we go.
Yeah. Felt really cool. I didn't know exactly how those worked before, actually.
Yeah. Let's see. So we talked about blind drops, we talked about interest nodes, we talked about keeping the camera ahead of the player. Let's look at some examples.
Yeah.
Oh, also, before I forget, let's put checkpoints in this map. How do I put checkpoints in this map? Let's put it like maybe right here.
Yeah, and I was going to mention checkpoints are one of the other things you had noted in your episode notes.
Yeah. I think actually this is probably a good thing to look at here. So let's say we die here, and then when we respawn, notice that the camera is pulled into the interest node. Because if we look at where the the checkpoint spawns, like right about there, yeah, almost exactly there, nice. And if we look at where the interest node extends, we can see that the checkpoint is kind of within this interest node area. And so when we respawn, immediately we're pulled into the interest node. So we can see the player, we know where we are, we can see the slope, we know what's coming up. And so even from a checkpoint, this camera kind of shows us everything we need to see. And so this is kind of like an extra concern that's always good to look at in maps. I'll show an example where we kind of use this. Let's see. Alright. First example. A recent map from the BRB, Evening Escalation.
Yeah, I remember hearing Big Diesel talk a lot about the work that went into this map that I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah. So this map uses a lot of interest nodes, and so we mentioned how kind of traveling vertically, we said it in the context of falling, but in climbing too, there's not as much space as you normally have for a horizontal map, because the screen is horizontal. So you have to do a little bit more work to make sure that the player can always see above them. And so we can see that almost always the camera is pulling ahead to the next node. And so it stays above us, lets us see the next obstacle.
Yeah, and this is really important for that kind of persistent theme that we've been talking about, is just making sure the player always has a direction, making sure they can always see that next dust.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main job of the camera. Oops.
Unless, of course, your map's intent is to not do that, in which case,
of course,
that's fine.
Every rule is made to be bent or broken, so you can definitely, if you're doing it intentionally, you can break these rules and have a good map, but always got to know the rules before you break them.
Yep.
And then there's some other cool stuff that this
MSG.
camera does that we'll come back and look at. That spot right there has a very cool piece.
Yeah, I was noticing a couple of those red handles as well.
Yeah. Offset where the camera thinks the player is. That would be very handy. Kind of lead the player, like, just let it go ahead more. That would be cool. Okay, other map I wanted to show off. Actually, before I move on, let's actually look at some of these camera nodes. So yeah, here we can see it's got that leading interest handle. Here again, very far, almost extending past the next node. Yeah, and so it just keeps pulling up the player. And then some wacky camera paths here that we'll look at later. Yeah, horizontal section, you can see it doesn't really use it as much, so this camera node is just normal. But then all these climbing sections, just interest node after interest node. Which is, I think, it's a good way of doing it. It's a good way of keeping the camera ahead of the player. Slidey lines is another one I wanted to look at. This is more of the boost style.
Oh, this map.
Yeah.
Wasn't this a daily recently?
It might have been.
Or, not recently, but like, recently.
Yeah. Here again we can see this kind of interest node chaining. So always trying to keep the camera ahead of the player. This one is kind of an extreme example. I looked for something that used it just maybe a bit excessively. A lot of maps don't use it quite this much. So. But on things like this drop, it's very important. Sections like this, maybe less so. Yeah, this one's a Sheila map. Let's see. Any other questions about interest nodes? And potentially force nodes. I guess we can look at... I guess... Yeah, force nodes for the purposes of kind of pulling things ahead. We'll look at another purpose of force nodes in a little bit. Have we talked about leniency yet? No, we have not. We're going to do that next. That's the immediate next thing.
Had a very good time with a certain map on creating lag with cameras.
Wait a minute. Why isn't it showing up? That's really weird. It has a picture. That's really strange. Okay, well, it's not important. It's just weird to see. File with the same name? Maybe. Could it be the tools that are on? I've only got the 2 files in here. I don't know. I guess it's not important. Force notes for creating lag. Yeah. We did see lag hill very recently where if you have force nodes overlapping other force nodes, it gets very confused. It tries to swap you between the 2 different paths and just back and forth, and it does a lot of extra work that does nothing.
We were doing that map on the weekly review. I couldn't believe that wasn't a Dustpot map.
Oh yeah.
That was just 100% base interactions that just end up working.
Actually, you know what? Since we're talking about lag machines, I found another one the other day, which is very similar. So here we have a checkpoint, and we have a checkpoint, and this is also a very effective lag machine.
Oh no.
Oh. Was this not it? Was it like even more than that? I thought it was... I'm pretty sure this is all it was. Huh. Maybe not. I swear. Oh well. Probably for the best. It might have been maybe some like boundary thing. Yeah, I'm here. You know what? We're gonna go off on this tangent. Sorry for anybody who's watching on YouTube. Let's see. What is the map that I was looking at? No, I'm not going to be able to find it again. Alright, you know what? That's for the best. I don't remember what it was called, but there was a map that had this in it. And it just... I stumbled into it, and I got a bunch of lag, and I just couldn't understand why. Yeah, maybe more entities, more things to save in the checkpoint, rather than just the player. That could be it. Anyway.
You should try it on my PRNG level, Skyhawk.
Yeah, I imagine that would be a bad idea. Alright, well, I think that's all the questions for interest nodes then. So yeah, let's move on to leniency. And more generally, let's move on to dealing with flexibility. So the player might not always travel in exactly the path that you want. Actually, here, before we do that, let's do this fix here. We mentioned that this camera, we had a problem where it thought we were trying to travel backwards. And so let's fix that with an interest node. When we're up here, actually an interest node might not even fix it. We might have to do a fancier thing here, but let's see.
Actually, Skyhawk, I think this would be a great place to use that lenience tool we're about to talk about.
Yeah, I think so too. So here we have a camera. We wanted it to trend upwards, but we have some kind of perpendicular motion here. So we're moving left and right in this area while the general map is trending up. So how can we kind of deal with this horizontal motion? Well, we could maybe have like some kind of camera path here that moves left. But now, first of all, we've got a lot of sharp corners, and the camera's going to do some weird stuff. But also, this any % route, where you just go straight up, it's going to have this camera jiggle that is probably going to put the player off screen. So we don't want we don't want that to happen. Instead, what we can do is we can kind of handle both routes at the same time using Lenience handles. So if I just use scroll wheel, these red handles appear. And we can move these around separately by clicking on the ends. And these will kind of give the camera some range to play with. So anywhere within this area, it'll kind of act like a free cam. It'll let the camera just follow the player as they move to the left or the right. But once they reach kind of this point, it'll stop again. So there's sort of like a box here of follow the player whenever you can inside this box, but if they go outside of it, don't keep following them. And we'll take a look at the curve and what that looks like.
Yeah, this is, in my experience, kind of a nice way to basically allow... give the same function as adding, say, another camera node in that direction, but being able to stay on that same camera path.
Yeah. And so actually this already fixed our previous problem where it kind of was sliding back down this bend, because now the bend outward is making kind of a sharper angle, and so it doesn't think that we're trying to go down. Yeah. It's kind of neat how this curve changes as it passes through here. And so maybe this line is a bit of a lie. Like it's not actually following that path, because we can see as we move around the curve changes completely. So yeah, this maybe isn't like the best reference to look at when designing the camera, but it does kind of give you a sense of like what the bounds are. So we know that if we're down here, it won't go any lower than this curve kind of shows us, and it won't go any higher than this curve kind of shows us. So if we're up here, it'll stay on this kind of bell-shaped end. Can the leniency handles be used to reduce the default leniency? I'm guessing you mean... Actually, one thing that... Before I do that, I just noticed the thing with this camera here. Where we fall down here, it kind of does a weird bend. I'm not sure if there's much we could do about that, except add more leniency. So here, we could have it so that even when you're falling down, like we don't need to know that, or in default play, you won't go up above this camera path, but it will kind of, now when we're falling down, it'll give us a better, here we go. So now if we fall down here, it gives us a smoother path down. It doesn't kind of force the camera to wiggle down around this corner as if we were traveling down this path.
Does it still work on the left side?
On the left side, no. Actually, you know what? That works not that bad. The camera still travels sort of below us. But yeah, that works better than I expected it to, actually. I guess because it's kind of like there was a second camera path up here that it's following. And so it kind of gives us these like min bounds and max bounds by having these, I guess more accurately, it's like this kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so within that, it's just got all that room to do what it wants. But yeah, so Maybetta's question, can it be used to reduce default leniency? Unfortunately not. This kind of wiggling is just built into camera nodes, because this is at 0 leniency. It doesn't show it because dust mod is nice, but there's actually, the lenience handles are still here. They're just at length 0. In vanilla, it actually shows you the zero length lenience handles.
Yeah, and I think this is why for the single screen map camera, we ended up making a script in Dustspot eventually to kind of get rid of that aspect of leniency. Even though
Yeah.
it's actually not necessarily a lenience thing and more just something the game is doing to try and keep the camera ahead.
Yeah, and it again, like, this is a nice feature. We do want the camera to stay ahead of the player, but there are some situations, like specifically single screen maps, where we don't need to keep the camera ahead of the player because the player can already see everything.
Yep.
So yeah, there are some script solutions for that problem. Yeah, so we added some lenience handles here to kind of handle this sort of branching route. Like, we have the player can go out for the SS route, or they can go straight up for the any %, and both work with this lenience camera. Let's show maybe some more situations with this, with a new map.
So Skyhawk, what else can we do to make interconnecting paths?
Yeah, so let's have something that the player can kind of choose a few different routes. This one I really should have planned ahead of time. Let's see. We'll want some kind of like different paths for them to take. Something like that, maybe. And then also something like some stuff up here. There we go. So
Underground, above ground, and in the sky.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So we'll have a grounded route, and then we'll have some platforms here. There we go. And then we'll have this kind of go up like that. Oops. There. And then we'll have the end of the map right here. Oop. And then we'll have some dust go below. Maybe like that. And then we'll have some dust up in the clouds. Maybe not on the whole platform. It's nice to not have your dust go to the edges of platforms generally. Let's do this one too. Why not? And do I do this one? Sure. Alright. How do we make a camera for this?
Yeah, this is kind of the classic problem where you need the camera to be able to go to many alternate paths, and you don't necessarily know which one the player is going to take first.
Exactly.
But you also don't necessarily want to limit the options of the player, especially in a map that can be this open.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, that's one thing we could do.
Make it super huge.
But I think there's a better solution here.
Let's see what blocks do we want to use for these? Sure, this. That's a nice one.
Or I should say another solution.
I'm just good.
Not having floating platforms also very important.
Yeah, I mentioned doing some art after the camera, but you know what? I think this doesn't need a camera for me to know that it's going to be good.
I would agree.
Oh, I should have. There we go.
Skyhawk, how do you know if the player is ever going to see this?
That's a good point. Actually, I don't like that sport. Yeah, we'll figure something out later. Okay, so here we go. Camera time. So let's see. How big do we have to make this for this to be a single screen? Is it 4,000? That kind of works.
I think it's probably closer to what Zyke was saying, maybe in the like low 3,000 range. Be wrong though. Assuming you're getting kind of a start closer to where the prisms are, I should say.
Yeah, here let's. Oops. Yeah, there we go. So clearly, this. Oh, yeah, I gotta fix this. This has to be 3,000 as well. There we go. So this is a single screen map, and we just call it a day.
And you know, this is okay.
It's okay, but it's very zoomed out. Like we can do better. We can show the player a little bit more of what they're doing. So let's make this a little bit different. We got our 1080 camera. We got our Connect node. Let's just, yeah. So we can see this platform alone. And we kind of want to have them do a few different paths. We could do this entirely with just Lenience. So we know that the general trend of the map is to be horizontal. And we know that we want the bounds of this to go, we want them to be able to see above them up to about these platforms. And above them to about these platforms. One interesting thing about Lenience handles is they can only show up at specific angles, so you can see the tip of this is moving. It's like snapping into different positions, which is kind of funny. It doesn't end up being too much of an issue, but it does mean that super large Lenience handles like this can maybe not go exactly where you want them to be.
Said usually a 1 degree difference on your Lenience handle I don't think is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we go up to like here, and then we go up to, we probably don't have to go there very far on this one. There we go. So now we have a path that can follow the bottom camera, and we have a path that can go through the middle, and we have a path that can follow the upper camera. And this all works out.
Works out, but it isn't very directed either.
Yeah, so the thing is that in a lot of this it's acting as mostly free cam, which can work. Like, this is pretty good. But if we want to have a bit more control over what the player sees, we can do that too. We just have to be careful. Like, the more control you kind of have as a map maker over the camera, the less you're maybe adapting to what the player can do. Like, for example, if the player decides to go left here, then it's just completely outside the camera range. Like, I as a map maker don't have any control over this. And so, but they still need to be able to see what they're doing at all times, so it's kind of a balancing act. let's actually. You know what? I kind of like just this, but yeah, I'll show another possible option. So let's say we get rid of this lenience entirely, so that we just have a center path. There's a lot of scrolling to get rid of these.
Indeed it is.
Okay, so next thing we can do, we can have branching paths on the camera nodes. So we mentioned before, if you have a node selected, you shift click, you can get another node. And here we can kind of see more clearly that this camera is going through these points. Like we can see the frame of exactly what the player will see.
Yeah, and this is kind of a decent way to have kind of a more defined route.
Yeah.
I think with the more lenience approach, you give the player a lot more options, whereas this is a bit more directed.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing where you're smoothing out the path of what the player sees. Like with just free camera, as the player moves around, the camera will move around a lot too. But by having a fixed path here, it's very steady, and so it gives a kind of like smooth, polished look to the motion as like you're moving through the map. But immediately we see a problem with this approach, which is if we try to go up here, the camera took the wrong path at the intersection. And so this is kind of a very common problem with intersections, is just depending on how you approach them, it won't know what to do. And so this is where lenience comes in very handy with intersections as well. So whenever you have an intersection, we can see now there's 3 handles because there's 3 paths coming out of this node. We want, the problem we were having before is when the player started on the ground down here and they jumped up, the camera had no way to cross from this path to this path. And so we're going to fix that with just lenience. So here we want a really long handle between these two so that even if the player passes up through this area, it'll still be kind of part of this intersection area. And so now when we do this, we jump up here, the camera's able to cleanly switch between these 2 paths. We could probably even make this a little bit further, just so there's no chance of it getting stuck. So yeah, this is kind of the second use of lenience handles, is preventing the camera from getting stuck.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to do the same thing over here as we add the second path for our upper camera. And so before, when we had just the lenience, we had a bunch of jumping around with the camera here because we had to be able to control wherever the player could go within this area. But instead, what we can do is we can have an upper path, and so wherever the player goes around here, let's go like this. Like, yeah, they don't need to be able to connect up to there. And then we'll do the same thing with the intersection, where the lenience goes like this. And we're still going to have a problem here, but we'll look into that. So now, when we go to the upper path, we see the camera doesn't get stuck on things because we've got the lenience. Actually, it would have been nice to have... Yeah, there we go. There's our 4th lenience handle. And we want to do the same thing here, where... So now, when we're going from this middle path to this upper path, we've got all this room to work with.
Yeah, that looks like it plays really nicely.
Yeah. So, I'm actually going to have this interest node, because one problem I was noticing without it is that we couldn't really see this top platform, because it's like very, very close to the edge, and that's just because of the slope of this camera. So what I'm going to do is when the player is on this platform, I want to show them this top platform. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. And then we can maybe, I don't know if it needs much interest on that end. There we go. Now they can see up there earlier. Maybe a bit too early. Or, you know what I could do? I could keep the interest node here and also just give them leniency. So within this, they can move left a little bit, they can move up a little bit, or down a little bit. I could maybe add in even another node here so that, like, just within this, I get more lenience handles, and so I get this whole range to kind of play with of where they can be. So now, all within this area here, it's maybe actually still a little jittery. Maybe I extend this even further and just make this interest area bigger. I'm gonna get rid of this too. That's another thing with deleting nodes, it can kind of mess up your handles. But that's okay. So here. Now, the interest node pulls me in from pretty far away, but I still have the ability, even though I'm in the interest area, I can move the camera around. Maybe almost too much.
Start getting some jittering if you don't allow them to have too much there, though.
Yeah. That one actually, this kind of tip of just like, yeah, so introducing an intersection just to get more lenience handles, I don't know if this is necessarily a good idea, but you can definitely have, like, typically what you want is you want your lenience handles to be perpendicular to the camera path. So the player can move left and right here just by nature of the camera path, but then you also want them to move up and down with the lenience handles. Yeah, so it's like a small little just free cam area within this section. Yeah, I think my original problem that I kind of introduced this interest node for of you can't really see the top platform is maybe not quite true. I think you can probably see it just fine. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wasn't really seeing the problem when you initially brought it up.
My idea was I wanted to kind of include interest nodes in here, but I think this map isn't very conductive to interest nodes in general. Maybe I could have one like right here. Yeah, that's how we can do it. So I want to just show them the ending. Like that maybe.
Yeah. I'll be honest, in this map, I don't know which of the two approaches we've looked at I prefer.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And so that's kind of like one of the things... Oh, here we go. We kind of messed up this camera node again by changing the angle, so we just got to make this larger.
I think I'd probably almost prefer maybe a lenience approach with a bigger camera, because I feel like it's really hard to kind of know where to go based on these cameras.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
it's
the
really
thing.
hard to...
As a map maker, I don't know which is the best route either. Unless you mean, like, you don't know what the possible options are?
Or, I just meant it's hard, in particular, in that top section to see just how much is going to be up there without actually going up there.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah, we could zoom the camera out more. The problem I wanted to kind of notice with this camera path is, so let's say we're up here, and we come down to this ending. The camera gets stuck up there, and we can see it kind of breaks briefly. This actually might not be as bad as I'm making it out to be, because, I mean, this is a blind drop, absolutely. There's no question about that, but the way the camera brake works, it actually pulls us in here pretty good. let's see. So, but another thing we could do is instead of having this interest node here, or maybe in addition to this interest node here, we could have what we kind of showed previously is a force node. So even when you're on this path up here, if you fall down in this area, then it forces you to come onto this lower path earlier. Maybe. I'm not sure how much I like this actually, but it is something you can do. In certain situations, maybe not this situation, this can be a good idea. And another thing here is that we've got this interest node that goes past this camera node. This is kind of a trick you can do to make combined nodes. So here we've got like a force interest node. So it's got the behavior of the force node here, and then immediately it gets pulled into this interest point. So now when we fall down here, oops. So immediately, before we even touch the ground, it pulls us down here. And so maybe that's better. This is kind of arguable. I don't know if I like it. But it can be done. The only thing I would want to be concerned with is I don't want the player to get forced onto this lower path when they're just doing upper path stuff. So making this too big can be also a problem, because now they can't see what they're doing. So I think I'm actually concerned enough about that happening that I'm going to get rid of it entirely. But we'll show off some examples. I think I've done enough with this camera path here.
I think we've got kind of a good example of what we wanted to show with this one.
Yeah. Alright.
And I think there are probably some blind drop examples in what we had prepared.
Yeah. Alright.
That said, just in general with cameras as well, it's always a good idea to run it by somebody else too.
For sure.
There is, as you've seen by our discussion here, there are 1,000,001 ways to do cameras, especially on a map like this. And it never hurts to have a second opinion on such a thing.
Yeah. Exactly. And actually, one more thing I'm going to do is this bend here, the player could go over the top here, and so I want to make sure that they can do that, so I'm just going to make this lenience handle really big. That way, there's a kind of secondary path between these nodes. But, yeah, we can do that without nodes, we can just do it with lenience. Maybe we do want to do it with lenience. I mean, with an actual node. Hard to say. Start them not on the dust. Let's yeah, okay. I like that better. Alright, yeah, example time. This has kind of been like more of a map making stream than a tutorial, but that's okay.
Sometimes the best way to do a tutorial is a map making stream.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, actually very first examples I want to show of some lenience are some stock maps, because stock maps really like to use this concept. We already looked at Abyss a little bit. Vacant Lot is another one that sort of has this. So here we have a generally vertical map with some horizontal movement as you climb, and so to deal with that, they don't just make the camera bigger, they have the camera kind of move back and forth between the bounds. So you can see the left wall over here but not the right wall, you can see the right wall over here but not the left wall, and the camera goes up.
I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah. And then a custom map that shows this pretty well.
Also, maybe Titan. I haven't looked at Titans, but that seems like an example.
Let's look at Titan. But yeah, the devs really liked using lenience.
The Nexus is the only thing that I can really think of for something with a crazy camera.
Yeah. Surprisingly little lenience on Titan, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this node had a bit of it. So, just because you're going to be moving up to set up this boost, and then moving down to hit the slope. And then, yeah, there's a lot of lenience on this handle, on this node.
Oh, yep, that makes sense.
And this one too. This one actually, it's kind of a blind drop. I think maybe they could have done less lenience, or maybe done more zoom. Because, yeah, you never know where this slope is.
Yeah, I think more zoom would have been nice.
Hard to say for sure.
So if you made it like 1600 or something, maybe.
Yeah, let's do 16.
Or something in the background. In addition, something in the background.
That's a good point.
Guide it.
Yeah. Let's do like.
There's a lot else. There's a lot of other things you can do. Like, it's not even a big slope for one.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see what that looks like.
Yeah,
Fixing
and
stock maps.
I don't feel like there's any reason for that to not be a big slope, really.
Maybe it does a little better. It's hard to say.
It's a big drop.
Yeah, it's a big drop. Lenience makes big boosts worse. Yeah, because we talked before about like you want the interest node to kind of pull you forward, and so the lenience kind of defeats that purpose because even when you're pulled forward, you're not pulled down because the lenience kind of lets you stay up there. Red and black. Here we go. Oops.
Yeah, this is a map. This camera went through a whole bunch of iterations to get to the state it's in now.
We can already kind of see there's a big bulge there for the lenience handle. Oops. I'm not doing the right route here.
Yeah, I'd possibly watch a replay on this one.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how you deal with these dust blocks. I think it's like this, maybe? But yeah, here we've also got the background working in combination with the camera, so we can see kind of like the path is drawn out in blocks on the back.
Yep. Path is drawn out in red. Did the best I could to get the camera kind of where you wanted it. For those that don't know, this was my competition map for the last competition.
Yeah, let's watch a replay. Somebody who can play
But
this
yeah,
a bit
this
cleaner.
is a camera I spent a long time working on, because this has a lot of drops, and honestly the one at the beginning is still basically blind.
Yeah, because we did mention like big drops are really hard to handle, and so the camera kind of helps with being an interest node and pulling it down, and then the background kind of helps with kind of drawing the line, but you can still just sort of die in these spikes, which is hard to avoid.
And you can even tell in that replay how close it is to not being a blind drop there. Mm-hmm. I tried very hard to make it work.
Yeah. So here we've got an example of a lenience handle. We don't know whether the player is going to play any percent and just drop down, or whether they're going to play SS and come over here to get this dust. So this lenience handle kind of lets them just do either. Encoder's having trouble with this? Ah, that's too bad.
Yeah, in this case, that lenience handle also helped with making sure that the player actually hit the interest node once they started going down, even if they were really far to the right. Because that, I remember, was something else we were having trouble with, was you can't just make a separate camera node over there, because if you do that, then you won't hit the interest node going down.
Yeah, if you have an intersection here, then you're going to have a problem. Oops, messed it up.
Yeah, so
it kind of
basically
acts like you've got a sort of V shape here where it'll go down and it'll hit this connect node, or this interest node rather.
Yeah. So it ends up being is something like this, where we do an interest node with that lenience, and we zoom out, and it's still not enough.
Yeah, maybe more zooming, but Yeah, there's a limit to how much you can do.
It looks really smooth in replays, though.
Yeah, for sure. Here we've got another instance of this kind of interest node going past the connect node, so kind of a dual connect interest. Here we've got some more interest nodes to kind of pull it down. And yeah, this end is just kind of straightforward because it's a horizontal section. We don't have to do too much fancy stuff.
Yeah, this was a very high effort camera from me.
Yeah.
And I had, I think, a lot of help from Skyhawk at the time in making it.
Here, next one I want to show off is Houndill by Maddie. And the reason why I want to show off this one is because it's got a lot of secrets. And so here we have an instance of a force node. So to kind of like, you've got your main path here, and it's just a simple horizontal camera. And then instead of kind of dealing with intersections and branching and how that works, you can just have a force node with your secret camera path. So it's kind of like combining two simple cameras rather than making one big, complicated camera. And then it lets you just not complicate your main path. Like, you wouldn't want somebody to start going to your secret and then your camera's like, oh, I'm gonna pan up because I know there's a secret here. So here there's nothing really suggesting that there's a secret until you're all the way committed to going up here, and then the camera's like, okay, yeah, you can come this way. There isn't, so there's a disconnect here because having a force, you could actually probably have a force back onto the main path. So if we wanted, we force you up here and then we force you down here. But easier and more flexible is to just have a disconnect. So here, or a detach rather. So yeah, when you are done exploring the secret and you come back over here, this detach node says, okay, yeah, let them come off of this path. And so no matter how you decide to come off of this area, it'll still let the camera follow you and let you see what you're doing. And I think that's kind of the best, or like the main use of detach nodes, is when you have like secondary camera paths, just letting you get off of them and go into free cam until you reach kind of another camera path. There can sort of be other uses for them, like for example, say you have a section where you don't really know what the player is going to do. Instead of trying to figure out exactly how you want to handle that, you can just give them free cam for that section. So here, for example, we could say, it's free cam now, go wherever you want. And then once they're back on the straight path, you put it back into camera path. Detach puts you into free cam. We don't directly connect back up to the main path, so we can see if we happen to get a bunch of height here, we can hit the detach and still avoid the camera path, and then only once we get back down here does it connect us up. Yeah, so a connect node would work, or just regular nodes when you're close enough to them, they'll connect you. So we can see that this node is a normal node, and then when we fall into it, it pulls us in.
Does that node area on a normal node influence how quickly you'd be
I don't
brought
believe
into
so.
those?
I think normal nodes just
Okay.
completely ignore the range, the node area. Yeah.
Good to know.
Another cool camera thing here that Maddie does is, so we mentioned before that we don't quite know where the player's going to go in this section, but we do know that it's sort of like a little mini single screen, and so we have interest nodes or interest handles to pull the player into this central spot, and then we just have like kind of our previous single screen setup where we've got just two nodes connected in a small area. And so that's kind of what this interest handle does, is it acts like this. And then once you're done with this area, then it lets you move on. second secret here is this apple right here. So we can see we've got like an intersection. And this intersection is an interest node, so the camera won't pan up. This is another way to kind of prevent people from like seeing your secret before you want them to, is have an interest node. And so we can see there's no interest handle on the left or the right. Only when it's going up does it prevent you with this interest pull. So it stays right in the center until you get up here and you've committed to this route. And that prevents a lot of the possible problems with intersections as well. Like we mentioned how it can get stuck on some of these turns. Well, the interest node is going to prevent it from doing that, because it's not going to try to go up unless it really, the player really goes that way. One more example with force nodes. So here we've got a section where we've got a lot of back and forth motion, and we want different camera behavior for different parts of this. So here we want the camera to go forward, and then we want it to kind of focus on this sort of single screen area. And then we want, in this part, we want it to go forward. Now, if we tried doing this with just a interest node, let's say we had it like this. Okay. Oops. So let's try it with no interest on the right. So here it pulls us in. That's all nice. But then once we get past the center, it drifts over to the right and it starts going down. We don't want that, so let's maybe try it with the interest handle going far right. So it pulls us in, we're centered, we go over here, oh, my bad. We go over here, it still stays centered. That's all nice and good, so that was what we wanted. But then now, we're getting to this section, and it took a really long time for it to start panning over. Like, we're here and we can see the next prism, but we couldn't see these prisms after that, so it's not doing the job of showing us the next obstacle very well. So just a normal interest node didn't really work here, because we wanted two different behaviors in the same spot. And so for that reason, what we can do is we can use two different camera paths. And so here we have a force node, so that when you're up here on the far right, it's just staying back here. But then when you're down here, when you go to the right, it follows you. So different behavior, different camera paths. Force nodes can help us with that.
And Skyhawk, this map is named Serve for Chumps by Yukis?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's also
I only know because I was looking at other Yukis maps earlier.
This also has some kind of interesting camera behavior for the checkpoint. So here we have a force node in the ground, and normally you would never reach that, but we have the checkpoint in the ground as well. And so the checkpoint kind of spawns you and immediately connects you to this node, and that way when you respawn, because normally when you would hit this checkpoint, let's say we didn't have this. So we would be on this path, and then we hit this checkpoint, and then when we respawn, because we were on this path when we hit it, it has us on this path over here. But what we would like is we would like for the checkpoint to show us what's coming up. So what we can do is say, okay, when you respawn, show us this camera path. And so that just kind of makes it smoother to progress in this spot. Anyway, fancy camera trick for checkpoints. But general principle is just have checkpoints show you what's coming up. There's one last thing I want to talk about. I think this episode is getting pretty long. People are probably getting tired of hearing about cameras, so I'll make this quick. This is a kind of more recent addition. Like, I mean, it's always been in the game, but people haven't really been using it until recently. Is let's say you have something where you have the player doing some kind of loop. Here, how do I make a loop? There we go. That's a loop, right? All right, I'm not going to be able to freehand this.
Flee.
All right, here we go. That's a loop. And then let's have some dust blocks. Oops. And then let's have, there we go. Just make sure the slope works. Oh my god, I'm not going to be able to do this, am I? Here we go. And then we take this and we put it here. Beautiful. Alright, so now, oh my god, it's not on the right layer. I can't believe it. Quick.
Skyhawk, never change. But we've all been there.
Yeah. There we go.
I couldn't tell you the number of times I did that when I was working on Dustforce arcade stuff.
Okay, I think that did it. Yeah, great. There we go. Like it never happened. Alright. So, in FreeCam, we noticed that we get this kind of up and down motion. And even with a camera path, here, let's put a platform down here so that we have somewhere to go. Even with a camera path, we notice we get a kind of up and down motion. Wait, oh my god, I did it again.
Skyhawk, remember to change the layer after you make the layer mistake.
Oh my god. So yeah, we get this kind of back and forth motion. Like it comes down to here, and then we do the top of the loop, and it kind of backtracks, and then it comes down. We can do better. So let's say we want the start of the loop to be down here, and then we want the camera to kind of stay fixed. We could do this with an interest node in this case, and that would work pretty well. But in some situations, an interest node doesn't always work. We'll show some situations where that's the case. But the second possibility is that you can use one-way nodes. So here we see when it kind of highlights, it only highlights half of the path on each of these camera nodes. And we can delete those individually without deleting the whole link. So we can delete the whole path by just right-clicking on it. But if we hold Control and right-click on it, it deletes only half of this path. And what this does is now these nodes are still connected, but it's sort of, once you hit this node, it'll kind of separate itself from this. And so this is a one-way path. This node can lead into this node, but this node does not lead back. And so if we see kind of what that looks like on the camera path, here we go. So when we backtrack, it doesn't follow us. And so what that means for this loop is that it's kind of rock steady even while we're going around the top of the loop. It follows us a little bit just because of the camera shake or camera like smoothing, but it doesn't go all the way around the circle again. And we can kind of even make this a little more extreme if we wanted. But if a player were to somehow like avoid the camera node, then it might have some weird consequences. So yeah, this is kind of being used more often recently. And let's actually take a look at a map that we already looked at. Where is it? What's it called? Evening Escalation. Yeah, so if I skip ahead a little bit, we already looked at the interest nodes here. Here we go, we see this kind of thing I just showed where you have this little alcove. You don't want it to kind of drop back down and come back up as you're going around this loop, so we have a one-way node. And then same kind of thing up here. So we have the player, we want it to smoothly, I guess this is probably a good example of why an interest node wouldn't work. Let's say we had a normal path with an interest node. Then as we're coming up here, it would kind of pull us ahead. But we don't want it to pull us ahead during the section like that kind of makes it seem like there's something important up here. We want it just smooth camera motion as we're following up this section. So here on the right, one-way path, we haven't hit this node yet. We've got smooth camera motion. It's just a single straight line. And then once we hit this node, we come back down here. We don't want the camera to follow us back down. If we were to make this a two-way camera again by connecting these nodes up, then when we hit this platform, camera comes back down and we can't see as much of the stuff above us. So we'd make this a one-way node, we get this nice smooth movement. Over here, we get to see more of what's above us. So it kind of locks that progress forward. But these one-way nodes are kind of niche. In general, you don't want to have, like if we just have a simple horizontal level. You don't want to be using one-way nodes here. Because the player could backtrack. You typically don't want to make a camera that forces a player to do a certain thing. You want to have the camera kind of just help the player rather than prevent them from doing certain things. So here, the player might forget something and they want to backtrack, but they can't because it's a one-way. So you don't want to use these too much. What was the silly speed physics map called? I think it was Physics Fun by Abu. Yeah, okay. It was already answered.
Yep. I was answering that one.
Yeah.
Highly recommend anybody that has not played that map to go play it. That is such a fantastic map.
Yeah, you could even in this example have connect or force nodes to allow them to backtrack, but that's kind of solving problems that were artificially created by you in the first place. In general, it's just better to leave the camera simple. Oh, I see. Yeah, the evening escalation. We can take a look, because I guess, yeah, the player could, in theory, backtrack through this section. Yeah, and so even once they've hit this, they could want to fall back down. It's not as smooth as it could be. Like this is a kind of a blind drop, even with the force node. It does technically work, but it's not very nice. But this is like edge case behavior, and so I don't think you really have to worry about the player coming back. So having this force node to make it, or sorry, this connect node. Oh, actually, yeah, that's a connect node, not a force node. So this node actually does nothing. Nobody caught it during testing, I guess, because nobody tried to backtrack.
Idea for a meme map.
But yeah, it's nice to make sure that the player can still do whatever they want to. Why does that work? We're reaching the edge of camera behavior knowledge. Because this is a connect node.
Aren't we always?
It shouldn't. You're already on a camera path. This connect node, yeah. See, it's not doing anything. But then once we get far enough away, it does pull you in for some reason. I don't understand. Yeah. Anyway, one-way nodes are interesting, but they're very niche. Don't use them too much. They can get you out of some weird situations, because sometimes fancy camera stuff can be like a puzzle. Like here we see this isn't actually one path with an intersection, it's a disconnect node with a lot of lenience, so that if you go down or come up from the secret path, we've got a force node here. Yeah. Oh, is it that? Yeah, it might be that weird thing where if you're in the edge of a connect node, it does some weird stuff. That might be it. Anyway, I won't spend too much more time looking at it, even though I am curious. Yeah. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to look at. So yeah, in summary, cameras work well when they show you what's coming up, as well as what you are doing. And there's a lot of fancy ways you can... Yeah. There's a lot of fancy
really
things
simple...
you can do to make
Go ahead, Skyhawk.
Yeah, we keep like stopping for each other and then talking over each other. Yeah, so just a lot of fancy stuff, but you don't have to do the fancy things. You can make it work with just a simple camera.
Yeah. Furthermore to that, I've made multiple maps with basically just that simple camera, and for a large portion of the play that gets done on custom maps, that works just fine.
Yeah. Let's see, we talked about... did we talk about unloading? Yeah, I think we did briefly. We talked about the large cameras. So yeah, it's...
The one thing I'm seeing in notes that we didn't mention is detach and connect pairs.
Oh yeah, that's another way to kind of deal with this sort of situation. We talked about force nodes here. So another thing you can do, instead of using a force node, what you can do is you can use a connect node here, and then instead of having this be like that, you can have a detach node here. So connect nodes only work when you're not on a camera path, so we just detach from this camera path, and that way the connect node can pull us in. I think sometimes this can work even faster than force nodes. So if you need really fast camera movement, this can be another option, is this detach connect pair. But I haven't seen it used well, I don't think.
And then node spacing, too few versus too many nodes.
Yes, yeah. That's definitely something I wanted to talk about. So
yeah, we talked about it a bit with kind of smoothing the camera path, but not necessarily in this context.
Yeah. So one thing we showed how kind of the camera can interpolate and do curves and stuff, and so you get this nice smooth motion of like bending. Some people like to have just closer nodes, like they want to have this kind of smooth curve, but this can lead to problems. First of all, it's not as smooth as it would have been if the camera had done it by itself. And second thing is that if the nodes go from like really long to really short, it can actually kind of conflict with the smoothing. And so we see like this little bend here, S bend. And so the camera gets stuck. It doesn't know how to interpolate between these points. And you get this weird kind of pause in this moment, like in this spot. So you want to have kind of like a less hands-on approach with the camera. Just let the camera interpolate the way it wants between
Let the game do what it was programmed to do.
Yeah, exactly. Because it does it pretty well. Second point is don't have cameras too far apart either, because the interpolation points between these. So here we go. So it's kind of like a little, it's stuck in this spot. And then if I go ahead again, now it's stuck in this spot. So you can get this kind of like jittering, pausing. Let's add some background props to really see what's going on, because we can't really see with just the sky. Yeah. So you don't want that. You want smooth motion as you're traveling horizontally. So keep them close and then kind of make a few nodes just to allow the camera to interpolate between more points.
Yeah, it's something you definitely get a feel for. It's not particularly too hard to figure out how far apart they need to be.
Yeah. So yeah, don't overdo it, but also don't underdo it. There's kind of a middle ground that's nice. But it's a pretty wide middle ground. Like, you don't have to worry too much about it. Just don't go to extremes, and you'll be fine. And I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's about all we have on the list.
Fun little exercise. And I'll leave this as homework. Exadifficult has a notoriously bad camera because players don't know where to go. They try going down and the camera just doesn't follow them. So take a look at this in Editor and see what you can come up with for how to fix this. I'd be interested to see what people like, how people adjust this in Mapmaking. So yeah, if you just want to like put the file in your level editor folder and make a change and save it, and then maybe post it in Mapmaking, or maybe just like a screenshot if that's easier. I'm curious what solutions people come up with to make this easier so that people can do the strats that they want to do here. Like, even the task has to do some weird stuff to make sure that the camera follows them, I think.
Of note, no, the task does not. They do that so that it's actually visible in full game.
I see. Okay.
I guess if I recall correctly, the task can be completely blind.
Okay.
But Zaandaa would know more than me.
For viewing purposes. But yeah.
I didn't have any input on Exa.
Yeah, okay.
But I do remember there were multiple possibilities. So basically the camera will only follow you after you've been on the ground for more than one subframe, I think. Yeah. Or on the subframe that corresponds with when the camera updates. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think it's the one that, like, as long as you're on the ground on the correct subframe of the frame, specifically the one the camera updates on, then the camera will follow you. There was once a Yada any % first draft that did not do this for the final climb, and the camera didn't follow you the entire way up, and it unloaded at the top because it was too far away, so it didn't actually finish the level.
Right.
Unless you watch in like fixed camera or something.
Yeah.
Oh no.
That was pretty funny. So we have to lose a frame currently in Yada any % by waiting for the camera so that it doesn't
just fixing it.
unload. In Exa, nothing's so far away that it unloads, and it's more of a coincidence that we land on the correct frame or the correct subframe.
Okay, interesting.
So it's fortunate that we are able to see what's going on. I'm pretty sure that's what's going on, because we wouldn't sacrifice a frame, if we don't have to.
Understandable. I was thinking just for like the actual SSL task, they might have kept it visually there. I wasn't sure if there was.
Maybe I didn't have any input on it, but I think it would also be funnier if it were all done off screen, and we would do that.
That's fair.
But yeah,
that would be hilarious.
Homework for viewers: make a better Exa camera. And I think that's all I have for camera talk. I went a bit long, but you know, it's fine. If I were more prepared, I would have made a shorter video.